Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Spoken Greats podcast. We are continuing in the Maxims of War series, where I'll be looking again at some quotes from Napoleon and how we can apply them to modern warfare and geopolitics. Today, I will be drinking a Yorkshire tea with a splash of milk, no sugar. Please let me know what you will be drinking in the comments. I would normally have a bottle of wine, but I figured if I start doing this every episode, if you take away the microphone, I'm just an alcoholic. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Commanders-in-chief are guided by their own experience and by their genius. Tactics, maneuvers, the science of the engineer officer and of the artillery officer may be learned from treatises, but the knowledge of grand tactics is gained only by experience and the study of the history of the campaigns of all the great captains. Gustavus Adolphus, Turenne, Frederick, as well as Alexander, Hannibal, and Caesar, have all followed the same principles. So here Napoleon's advocating for reading of the greats, like how many military academies today study Napoleon. In Napoleon's day, officers would study generals like Caesar or Hannibal. And you can look at these foundational generals kind of led the way to establish modern military doctrine. And if you will, that Napoleon is sort of standing on the shoulders of giants from those who came before him. So Napoleon studied Caesar, Julius Caesar that is. Julius Caesar studied Alexander the Great. And in each of these cases, the generals would often compare themselves to their predecessors. You can obviously see that Napoleon had an affinity for the Roman Empire when you look at the imagery, declaring himself emperor, using eagle standards, and trying to capture a lot of territory which was formerly the Roman Empire. You can see an inadequacy there. And even Julius Caesar himself, he looked back at Alexander the Great, felt like a loser, because when Julius Caesar was 30, he'd barely achieved anything as a young senator. Meanwhile, by the time Alexander the Great had reached that age, he'd already conquered everything from Greece all the way up to India. And so in each of these examples, these great leaders were often, they felt inadequate and they were comparing themselves to the ones who came before them, wanted to achieve similar greatness. But also adding into that, they benefited from the experiences of their predecessors. Because this is the great thing with reading, is that you can extract the wisdom from someone else without having to go through the pain of making the mistakes that they did. It is an incredibly underrated process for gaining experience. And the strongest wisdom, obviously, is the one that you gain from your own experience, because those lessons hurt the most from making mistakes. But if you're able to read someone else's experiences, you're able to circumnavigate that and extract the lessons without suffering the hardships. General Mattis, the former US Secretary of Defense, said that if you're not reading hundreds of great books, you are functionally illiterate, because reading gives you exposure to a vast array of human experience, more than you could ever possibly live in your lifetime. And in a matter of hours, you can take in those experiences condensed in that short form. And so it's incredibly powerful. It's not enough to just take in information. Obviously, it's worthless without having the necessary qualities for taking action as well. This is why you don't see military historians leading the military, because just having that knowledge in it alone in of itself is not enough to be a good leader. You also have to be able to act on it. And also being able to absorb these great books to the point that it becomes second nature. Think of it like training. You're drilling it over and over again until it sounds like you're repeating yourself. And then at that point, it shows that you can you've actually fully appreciated the principles and put them into practice. Because it's no good reading a clever quote, thinking, oh yeah, that's really good, and then the next day you don't act on it. What was the point of reading that information? And so really, to get the benefit of reading someone like Napoleon or Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great or Sun Tzu's Art of War, if you're going to get the most out of it, you need to read them again and again and keep going back to them, keep revising them. And these things have stood the test of time. They're not going out of fashion. What they have to say is just as relevant today as it was 2,500 years ago, or 200 years ago in the case of Napoleon. You know that it's a long-term bet that taking these principles to heart will be an effective long-term strategy. If you're following the latest developments, which, obviously you have to keep up with innovations and new ideas, but if you're just keeping up with the latest shiny object, most of that stuff is here today, gone tomorrow. There are books that are a dime a dozen, which lose relevance as soon as they are published, because facts are dated. Facts can be looked up. They can be Googled. Someone on the internet can go, actually, I think you'll find this. Whereas principles, if you understand principles, you can adapt them to any circumstance. So it's not about, oh yeah, wasn't it great when Julius Caesar built a second wall around the wall of the siege of Alesia? It's more understanding the principles of defensive warfare and how fortifications can obstruct the enemy. That is a much more important principle to learn than you never guess what. This is an impressive fact. So study the greats and really study them in a serious way. Don't just casually read them. Study them to the point that it becomes second nature. So here's another one. The first thing for a commander-in-chief is to determine what he is going to do, to see if he has the means to overcome the obstacles which the enemy can oppose to him, and when he has decided, to do all he can to surmount them. So again, this goes back to Napoleon's principles of decisiveness. First of all, figure out what it is you're trying to do, because if you're second-guessing yourself when you haven't even decided what action you're going to do, you're going to get stuck in what's known as paralysis analysis. It's good to analyze the options that you have available, but once you have decided on a course of action, you need to commit to it with the forces that you have available. Once you've decided that an action is viable, you know what you will do if the enemy tries to stop you. It's then time to commit. It is rare and difficult to find in one man all the qualities necessary to be a great general. That which is most desirable and which immediately sets a man apart is that his intelligence or talent is in balance with his character or courage. If his courage is superior, a general heedlessly undertakes things beyond his conception, while on the contrary, if his character or courage is inferior to his intelligence, he does not carry out his conceptions. So this goes back to what I was saying about why military historians aren't commanding armies, because they have the intelligence, but they don't have the courage to act on that knowledge. And in the same way, there's the common refrain, there's a fine line between bravery and stupidity. Just being willing to fight is not enough. You need to be able to employ your forces in an intelligent manner. And so you've got to get that balance right between doing the right thing and having the courage to do it. Because having the courage to do the wrong thing is running in the wrong direction. And having the knowledge to do the right thing, but not the balls to do it, is when you will freeze and do nothing. And so having those two qualities is very difficult to combine. There's an interesting psychological phenomenon known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is where the more knowledge someone has on a topic, the less confident they are in their knowledge of that topic. If you think back to Socrates quote, I only know one thing, and that's that I know nothing. It's a similar thing to that, in that when you start off in a topic, you don't know what you don't know. And as you start to learn more, you see the horizon and you see the variety of things. You're like, oh, wow, this is just how ignorant I am. I know that I don't know X, Y, or Z. And so you start to become less confident. Whereas someone who has very little knowledge on a topic is much more likely to say things with conviction. And because they haven't an appreciation of the depth of the topic, they dismiss it and oversimplify it, which in a general is obviously a very dangerous quality. Because if someone is overconfident because they are ignorant of the situation, they're going to send their men to death, aren't they? And unfortunately, the opposite end of this Dunning-Kruger effect is that someone who fully appreciates the gravity of the situation is more likely to be averse to risk and reluctant to put their troops in harm's way, which may in fact make it more likely that they will lose because they don't act fast enough. And so trying to balance yourself on that scale where you have sufficient knowledge to appreciate the complexity of the situation, but still have the necessary courage to act when necessary is very difficult to do. The great actions of a great general, not the results of chance and destiny. They come from planning and from genius. So there is a lot of black swans in war. What do I mean by a black swan? A black swan is an event that is unforeseeable, that can have catastrophic effects on an outcome. So, for example, 9/11 started a 20-year war in the Middle East from one terrorist attack. Or the Arab Spring, one man in Tunisia setting himself on fire kicks off revolutions across the Middle East and civil wars and insurgencies. And it's very difficult to not only predict that such event will happen, but that the fallout of events will lead to a certain outcome. So I don't dismiss, there are a lot of those in war and geopolitics, and how many events in history would have changed if something had happened 20 minutes early or 10 minutes later. How differently would the Normandy landings have gone if there was a sudden change in weather and the landing force was scattered tens of miles apart from each other, or if a German general had the balls to wake Hitler up and ask for authorization to release the reserve divisions. If Gavrilo Princip hadn't stopped to have a sandwich in a cafe in Sarajevo, exactly where the Archduke Ferdinand was passing by, then he may not have been assassinated and World War I may not have started. There's so many what ifs in history where things very easily could have gone a different way. With that said, nothing ever goes to plan, but planning is still a very useful tool to arm yourself against possible contingencies. Because you know things are going to go wrong. The question is, how are they going to go wrong? What will you do? Now, you can't predict every possible outcome, but in going through this process of red teaming your actions, asking yourself, what will I do if such and such happens? Preparing for the unthinkable, it gets you in the process of being prepared for the worst case scenario or the most dangerous course of action. Because if you don't prepare for the worst but hope for the best, then you're naive. You're putting yourself in danger. And being able to think on your feet and come up with creative solutions when things don't go to plan, that is far more important than luck. Because everyone gets their share of good luck and bad luck. So a good general should be able to win in 9 out of 10 realities, as opposed to being lucky in one and the rest is up to a coin toss. Commanders-in-chief must never let either the victors or the vanquished rest. This comes into a common part of military planning process, which is known as the sustaining. What you do after the mission is accomplished. So the implication is that there is always a next mission. There's always an additional action that is to be done after the one that you've set out to do has been achieved. And so it gets you into that mindset of thinking, what's next? What's next? What's next? If you have a successful mission, you need to pursue the enemy and maintain the pressure on them to not give them the chance to recover from their loss. And so you can exploit the advantage as much as possible. Equally, if the enemy is victorious, you cannot give them the space to lick their wounds and do a victory lap. You need to make them bleed and extract every last piece of resources out of them that you can. And when it comes to your own troops as well, if they are allowed to rest after victory, they'll get complacent. They'll rest on their laurels. And then suddenly success can be snatched from them at a moment's notice, because you're only as good as the last battle you fought. It doesn't matter how you performed in the previous 20, 30 battles. It only matters the current one you're fighting. So yeah, you want to avoid that complacency. And again, in defeat as well, if you want to avoid a general breakdown in discipline or morale, you've got to maintain the fighting force, because ultimately there will be other battles to fight. It's about getting ready for the next iteration. Irresolute general, acting without principles or plan, although at the head of an army superior in number to that of the enemy, finds himself almost inferior on the field of battle. Hesitation and half measures lose all in war. Right, so it doesn't matter on paper what resources you have, how many tanks you have, how many soldiers you have. If the commander does not understand military principles and how to use his resources in the best possible manner, then he will lose. You could transport a troop of modern battle tanks back to the Napoleonic battlefields, give them to a commander. But if that commander does not understand fundamental military principles, the importance of terrain, overwhelming firepower, the planning process, keeping things supplied through a good logistics chain, defensive positions, all of these things. If a commander does not understand these, then whatever advantage you've just given him does not count, and he'll squander it. And he goes on to say here that hesitation loses all in war. And it goes back to that point I was making about acting on knowledge once you have it, because there's nothing valuable in knowledge itself if you don't use it. In battle, as in a siege, skill consists in converging a mass of fire upon a single point. When the fight is on, he that has the skill to bring a sudden unexpected concentration of artillery to bear upon such a point is sure to win. Napoleon here is talking about using overwhelming firepower. Artillery, when concentrated on a point, can be devastating. It doesn't matter what advanced armor you have, which switched on, highly trained special forces operators you have. A barrage of 105mm artillery is devastating. If you're caught in that point, God help you. And so being able to fix the enemy on a single point where you can concentrate heavy artillery on them, it will have an incredible effect. Kinetically, it's going to kill and injure a lot of people. Psychologically, it will put a lot of hesitancy into the enemy and just physically block them as well. They won't be moving from a position. And whilst they're blocked, you can then maneuver into a place where you can assault their position. So concentrated artillery is a surefire way to succeed, because despite all the advances in air defense and, counter battery fire, there's only so much that you can do. Ultimately, if you're firing a lot of munitions, no one can intercept them all. And so they're going to get through. And when they do get through, the effects will be very powerful. The better the infantry, the more it should be economized and supported by good batteries. Good infantry is without doubt the sinews of an army, but if it has to fight for a long time against very superior artillery, it will be demoralized and will be destroyed. A general who is a better tactician, more skillful than his adversary, may, with better infantry, obtain some success during the part of a campaign, although his artillery is very inferior. But on the decisive day of a general action, he will feel severely in his inferiority in artillery. This is a point you can see in the conflict in Ukraine today. Many people were pointing out that the Ukrainians had received a lot of training from NATO forces. They were developing very good special operations forces, and they were getting very good equipment in terms of artillery and anti-tank missiles, etc. And whilst that was tactically quite devastating, strategically, in this large-scale industrial war, it's come down to who has more rounds. Russia has been producing more munitions. It can supply its forces with more artillery rounds than Ukraine or NATO can. Despite whatever tactical setbacks there may be on the Russian side, they are bleeding through troops, wasting resources, but just through the sheer weight of artillery, they are gaining ground. It goes back to that principle of overwhelming firepower. If you are able to suppress your enemy more than he can suppress you, you can maneuver an assault. And if you can maneuver an assault, you can take ground. That's the precarious nature of it at its current state. It's not that artillery is enough to win a war, but it's a very crucial factor to have an artillery advantage, especially once the effects of air support are nullified. A good army of 35,000 to 40,000 should, within a few days, especially if it is resting upon a strong fortress and a large river, render its position unassailable by an army twice its strength. I would argue that the numbers here are kind of irrelevant. It just goes back to the principle of using the terrain for your advantage, and strong fortified positions kind of nullify any numerical disadvantage that you may have, especially if it's supported by terrain, which just makes it so much easier to defend. War is composed of nothing but accidents, and while he should adhere to general principles, a commander should lose no opportunity to profit by these accidents. It is the essence of genius. In war, there is only one favourable moment. Genius seizes it. Absolutely. There are unforeseen circumstances at all times. That goes back to luck again. Success is not merely a run of good luck, because everyone will get their share of good luck. It comes from identifying opportunities when they come along. When something fortunately happens, do you capitalize it and exploit it to your advantage, or do you ignore it? It's often missed opportunities that will have the unforeseen impact on a conflict. Either people saw them at the time and didn't understand the implications, or they hesitated and decided not to exploit them. Defensive war does not exclude attack. Likewise, offensive war does not exclude defense, although its object is to break through the frontier and invade the enemy's country. Absolutely. Even when you're defending, you still need to be prepared to counterattack. Also, aggressive action can disrupt the enemy's own offensive action. And when you're on the offensive as well, you need to be able to consolidate the ground that you've taken. Holding ground is just as important as taking ground. Otherwise, everything you just invested in was for nothing. And so being able to switch between the two is a very important skill. Often you may have to do both simultaneously. Whilst you're probing the enemy's defenses, you're also fortifying your own. And you need to be prepared as well for the enemy changing their direction of action. If they are switching from defensive to the offensive, or vice versa, do you have the contingencies in place to deal with that? Being able to occupy those two possibilities in your head at the same time adds to the complexity, but it also prepares you for the worst. Field fortifications, when well understood, are always useful and never harmful. Digging in never hurt anyone. Apart from the fact of it being agonizing to dig a trench with an entrenching tool, You should never say no to having better cover. A position can never be too protected. And so if digging a trench or establishing some kind of other fortification gives you a small additional advantage, you should take it. The order of battle must be decided not from the terrain alone, but from all attending circumstances. So I've repeated a lot about the importance of terrain, and it's certainly one of the single most important factors. But it is not the single determining factor. There are so many different things in war which you need to consider, because first of all, it depends who you're fighting, depends what it is you're trying to achieve, what resources you have with you. Just because high ground is favorable to the defender doesn't mean that no one has ever taken high ground in history. It's happened loads of times. And so while the terrain does make certain actions either impossible or very difficult to do, it is not the only factor in that. If the enemy has air superiority, you'll need to range your force in a way that they are sufficiently protected by an umbrella of air defense. If there is an artillery advantage to the enemy, then you're going to need to make your force more mobile and maneuverable so it doesn't get pinned down. And similarly, if you're against a heavy armor unit, you need to configure your all-bat in a way that maximizes firepower to meet that. Terrain is not the be-all end-all. It's a very big factor, but not the only one. Nothing will disorganize an army more or ruin it more completely than pillage. Pillaging is a total breakdown in military discipline. Soldiers are just grabbing whatever shit they can find and lining their own pockets. And you may think, well, that's fair enough. The victors take their share of the spoils. Why shouldn't they? Soldiers then tend to fight over who gets what and who gets the share of the plunder. They become so fixated on what shiny stuff they can acquire, they totally forget all tactical considerations, and it just descends into chaos. It's no different to a mob looting. And before you know it, you'll have soldiers fighting each other rather than fighting the enemy. So I'm going to end on this one here, and I'm going to paraphrase because it's quite a long one. But Napoleon talks about all great commanders in history have followed the principles of war. And it is only through following those principles that they have achieved success. For whatever lucky circumstances that they've happened to take advantage of, it's only by conforming to these principles that they achieve their aims. And he says here, they are our great models, and it is only by imitating them that we may hope to approach them. Just today, as we're looking back at Napoleon's military success, Napoleon is advocating himself for looking back at his predecessors and standing on the shoulders of giants. And I couldn't put it better myself. Let's learn from our predecessors, their achievements, their pitfalls, take that wisdom and put it to good use. That's it for today. Thank you for listening to the Spoken Greats podcast again. So we're now finished with Napoleon. Please let me know in the comments what you would like to hear me analyze next. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like and hit the subscribe button. See you soon.